want to talk about journalism because a lot of people are confused and misguided when it comes to stories being broadcast in publications or news outlets, etc. Now, I'm not a journalist, don't quote me on this. However, I have been told through the years that my work with the 98% does somewhat constitute journalism. And while I'm uncomfortable using that term, I have learned a lot about the process of what journalists go through in order to publish a story. So let's talk about it, because very often when stories come out about someone that other people may not like or agree with, it's very common to fob it off as slander and lies, and that is just not the case. We saw this a lot with the Noel Clarke case. We're seeing it now with Married at First Sight, with the women accusing their on-screen husbands of rape and sexual assault. People in the comments saying that it's lies, where's the evidence, this is all made up, as if a leading news outlet is just going to publish stories blindly without doing their due diligence. So let's talk about how a story may come to be featured in a publication. First of all, please do not assume that someone who has experienced wrongdoing first and foremost runs to a journalist to have their story plastered over the papers. Very often it's a last resort. These people go to the places where you usually report or seek support to no avail, and so they feel that the only way that they can seek justice, have their story heard, or get something out there is journalism. So let's say someone goes to a journalist. The first thing that journalist is going to ask is, do you have evidence of what you're reporting to me? That person will then provide the evidence, but that journalist then has to independently verify the evidence that that person has brought. If they cannot prove the claim or there is no evidence, that's when you see terms like allegations. They allege, because at that point they can only allege, they can't prove it. Then once the journalist has gathered everything they need in terms of evidence or storytelling or testimonies, they will then take that to the person in question to offer them a right of reply. So they will say, we are writing an article about this that features these allegations or these concerns. What is your response to this? And then that person will respond or not. Sometimes they'll respond directly, sometimes they'll respond via lawyers, or sometimes they'll just ghost the journalist. That's why you'll see things like, we reached out to so-and-so for comment and they refused to comment, or we reached out to so-and-so and they replied via their lawyers stating XYZ. Now, let's say that that person says something that refutes or brings into question the allegation or the concern that's been brought forward. That journalist is then going to take what that person says to clarify, to re-corroborate, to bring it back and say, well, you said this, but they said that. What does that mean? And then if they find that there's further confusion or that this person has maybe told a lie to cover up something that they're trying to cover up, the journalist will then go back to them again and say, sorry, can you clarify this? Because you told us this claim, we've been able to prove that this isn't correct, so what do you say to that? Sometimes this process can take months of back and forth between the journalist, the person in question, and the person or the people that brought the stories to the journalist. Then, when they get something all together, it's then brought to the legal department of that publication. So the BBC will have their own legal department, but something like Deadline will have a legal team in the US and the UK, potentially elsewhere, because they're an international publication. And those lawyers will go through the article with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that nothing is included that could put them in hot water or a potential court case. That's why articles covering uncomfortable stories are so often barely the tip of the iceberg, because everything included has to be solid. So if someone is bullied by someone extensively, often there's not a lot of evidence for that. So someone's character can't even be brought into the article, even if it provides context to allegations that can be proven, because of that risk of defamation or slander. So after the legal team approves it, it's then brought to the editor, or maybe vice versa. I'm not entirely sure on the order of this. And the editor has that same hat on. Is anything included in this article going to put us in legal hot water? And if they say yes, they might pull the article. They might ask the journalist to remove certain things. They might ask the journalist to go and get further clarification, or they'll just say, yep, sign off on it, ready to go. I can't imagine how annoying it must be for a journalist to go through all of these checks, jump through all of these hoops, and sometimes work on a story for months and months and months, sometimes years and years and years, to then finally have that article out there and see people on the internet say that it's false, lies, or lazy journalism. So now we're at the point of the story being out there. And this is where you hear defamation, defamation, slander, lies. Because what else is a perpetrator or the subject of wrongdoing in the article going to say? What else are they going to say? Of course they're going to claim it's not true. Of course they're going to claim that it's lies. Even though they have already been given the opportunity to share their side of the story. This is another thing, is you'll see people say, well, what's their side of the story? There's two sides to every story. Yeah. The article will feature their side. If they refuse to comment, that says a lot. Or if they do comment, that is their side. So let's just touch really briefly on what defamation is, and I'm going to do more posts about this in future. For something to be defamatory, the person claiming defamation has to prove that they have suffered reputational damage based on a false claim. Now, if it ever did get to court, the onus does fall on the individual or the publication who has published those claims to prove that what they're saying is true. However, the person claiming defamation has to first bring reasonable arguments and claims as to why they believe what's being said is false. And a publication or broadcaster is not going to risk its reputation or professional integrity by posting a bunch of untruths willy-nilly just because. So Noel Clarke, for example, he sued The Guardian because he suffered reputational damage, as he should. But the courts upheld The Guardian's reporting because, of course, they're thinking ahead. They're thinking, if this person ever actually does take us to court for defamation, we have to be able to prove that what we are saying is true. And in that case, they did. Defamation is not someone said something about me that makes me look bad and I don't like it and I want people to stop saying it. Defamation is a legal term in reference to someone who has suffered reputational damage based on something that is provably false or obviously not true. I understand that reading something about someone you know or have heard of, or an experience that totally contradicts your personal experience, that can be uncomfortable. I get that. And I've spoken about this before, but two things can be true at the same time. If someone is talking about their negative experience of someone and that's not something that you've experienced yourself at all, that doesn't take away their experience or mean that they are lying. And if someone feels compelled enough for whatever reason and has the bravery and courage to work with a journalist to get their story out there, that is not something to be taken lightly. I hope you understand a little better now how things like this work and why articles in trusted publications shouldn't just be discarded as false claims because you don't like or agree with what they're saying. Especially when it comes to investigative journalism, sometimes that's the only avenue that people have to actually be seen and heard, and they deserve our support and respect, not to be branded a liar or as someone starting a witch hunt.